Good evening. This is Congressman Tim Bishop, and I thank all of you for joining the call. We try to do as many of these town hall meetings as we can. We find them to be a very effective way of reaching large numbers of our constituents. We did one of these calls, I think it was 2 weeks ago, and we had over 12,000 people participate in the call. Not necessarily for the entire call, but that we had as many as 12,000 people on the call at one time. We have an hour. In the last town hall meeting, we were able to get to about 14 or 15 questions, so we're certainly not going to be able to get to everyone's question tonight. But if people have questions that they are not able to ask, I would ask you to contact my office in Patchogue tomorrow, and that phone number is 631-289-6500, and give the question to whoever answers the phone, and we will get back to you in as quickly as we possibly can. We're waiting for some more people to get on the call so that we can develop some questions, but we very much hope that you'll have questions. But let me just tell you that today we passed out of the House, and tomorrow it will pass out of the Senate, some very badly needed legislation to fix or begin the process of fixing the crisis in the VA system. You all, I'm sure, are aware of what has emerged from an assessment of the VA, and it's simply intolerable that our nation's veterans have not been receiving the level of care that they should receive in a reasonable period of time. So we passed a bill today out of the House that adds $18 billion to the VA, and it basically breaks down in two broad categories: about $5 billion to increase the staffing of the VA and add physicians and allow people to use vouchers to seek care at other healthcare facilities outside of the VA if their wait time is too long with the VA. If you have a question to ask, please dial *3, and you will be transferred to one of our staff members who will take your name and your question, and then you will be put into the queue for being selected for a question to ask on the call. So if people have questions, please dial *3, and as soon as we have a sufficient number, we will begin the process of taking questions.
Okay, Congressman, I think we have our first question.
Okay, great. Thank you, Deb.
All right. Barbara in East Quogue, you are live with the Congressman.
Okay, Congressman Bishop, this is Barbara Latanzio, and my question to you is about the Affordable Care Act. I'll try to be as brief as possible. My husband and I, our regular insurance was canceled. We had no choice but to go through the Affordable Care Act. We got Empire Blue Cross Blue Shield, and there are many doctors all around Suffolk County, and I'm sure other places, that do accept Empire but won't accept it if it comes through the Affordable Care Act. We get no assistance. We're looking for no assistance. We pay over $1,000 a month, and I find it's discriminatory, and I was wondering what your views are.
Well, my views are that, first off, the networks that are that comprise the Affordable Care Act exchange plans are still being built. Some doctors and healthcare facilities have joined the plan, some have not, and that is an ongoing process. And one of the things that has happened in this first year of the exchange plans is that some healthcare providers and some physicians stayed out, weren't sure how they were going to work, and so they didn't sign up for those plans. The anticipation is that when we get into year 2 of these plans, now that people see that it's working, now that people see that the reimbursement rates are reasonable rates for providers and for hospitals and for physicians, more and more hospitals and physicians are accepting these plans. What I would ask you to do, we have a person in our office who handles issues that are related to the Affordable Care Act. His name is Bilal, B-I-L-A-L, and I would ask you to be in touch with him tomorrow 631-289-6500, and we can work with your plan and hopefully with the physicians that you hope to access to make sure that you get the coverage you need. And this is one of the unfortunate circumstances associated with some of the plans. I also have a plan that I purchased through an exchange. It's a Blue Cross Blue Shield plan, and I've been fortunate. The doctors that I need, that I and my wife need, are covered in the plan, and that was one of the ways I chose the plan that I chose, because I wanted to make sure that the physicians I needed were in the plan. But this is one of the things that we need to improve, and that I'm confident we will improve as we work our way through our first year of this new healthcare delivery system. I hope that answers your question, Barbara, and I hope you'll be in touch with our office.
Okay, next we're going to go with Barbara from Kings Park.
Yes, I have a question about Medicare. I heard that they want to go to a voucher system, or the Republicans want to go to some kind of a voucher system. What would that do? I'm on Social Security and Medicare. I mean, my Medicare is deducted from the premiums deducted from my Social Security check, and I'm going to get less coverage. Is that it? I have
I want to be clear, because I don't want you to be concerned. There is a proposal that has been contained in the Republican budget resolution that has now passed the House 4 times in each of the last 4 years, that would turn Medicare as we now know it into a voucher system for people who are at the age of 55 or below. If you are currently a Medicare recipient, there would be no change to your coverage or the way you access your coverage. But under this proposal, people who are 55 or below would no longer have access to Medicare as we know it. They would be given a voucher that they would then use to enter the private insurance market and purchase a plan. And most healthcare experts and most senior policy experts consider this to be a real attack on Medicare as we know it. Big picture, round numbers, senior recipients of Medicare right now roughly pay about 35% of their medical expenses, and Medicare covers about 65% of their expenses. What most policy experts project is that if we were to go to this voucher system, let's say 10 years from now, when people who are 55 turn 65, that it would flip, and roughly 35% of their medical expenses would be covered by their voucher, the policy that their voucher buys, and roughly 65% would be out of pocket. So I oppose this plan. I have voted against that budget resolution in each of the last 4 years, and I have done so for lots of reasons, but one of the reasons I did is that I think seniors deserve the security and the certainty of Medicare, and this voucher system would take that away. So I'm very much opposed. But I want to be clear, if you are currently a Medicare recipient, you have nothing to worry about. No proposal would affect current Medicare recipients. And I also want to be clear that this voucher system is just a proposal. It does not have the force of law, so it is not yet in effect. I hope, Barbara, that answers your question.
Okay, our next caller is Gary from Banning Hollow. Gary, you're live with Congressman.
Oh, thank you very much, Congressman. This is really a sort of a quality of life issue along the North Shore of Long Island that I'm sure you're well aware of. It concerns the helicopter flight paths.
Yes.
And the currently expiring regulation, or mandate to FAA that expires on August 6th. I know that you're very involved in this issue, and I just wanted to. We are just, I know all on North Shore we prefer a South Shore route for helicopters going to locations along the South Shore and out in the Hamptons, but having the helicopters stay over the water at a certain height, 2,500 feet or something, or a mile offshore, it certainly helps, and it has helped already. I'm just wondering how the progress is going with that renewal, and we can speak to that.
Thank you very much for the question, and it's a huge issue for people along the north shore of the island and the North Fork of the island. Here's where we are. 2 years ago, the FAA, for the first time ever, took on the responsibility of regulating helicopter traffic, and they did so primarily because they were receiving such pressure from me and Senator Schumer to regulate, as I say, something that they had never done before, and we convinced them to put in place what we called the North Shore route. And the North Shore route requires that helicopters leaving New York City, approaching the east end of the island, have to fly about a mile offshore at an altitude of at least 2,500 feet until they begin their transition to the airport at which they're going to land. And one of the flaws of this plan is that the transition point is entirely at the discretion of the pilot. But that was put in place. That expires in August. That particular provision that I've just described, the FAA has announced that they will renew. What Senator Schumer and I have asked them to do is not just renew it, but also extend it. And so require pilots that are approaching East End airports to stay offshore for a mile offshore. For the entire trip out east, they must go around Orient Point, around Shelter Island, and then transition in to land at whether it's going to be East Hampton or West Hampton or Southampton. We've also asked the FAA to put in place a South Shore route. So our goals here are two. One is to provide an alternative to the South Shore, to the North Shore, so that some of the approaches to the East End will be along the South Shore route, which will relieve some of the traffic along the North Shore. And then the second is to keep helicopters over water to the greatest extent possible and not allow them to transition, let's say, to East Hampton over Baiting Hollow or over Jamesport or over Cutchogue or wherever it is they're choosing to do it. So we're very hopeful that we can get this done. It is a serious quality of life issue for a great many of our constituents. We've made some progress, as you noted, but we've got a ways to go, and hopefully we can get that done. And it's as you say, and as a great many people have made clear to me, this is a really, really important issue, and I will assure you that Senator Schumer and I are working very hard on it. Pleased that we've made some progress, but we recognize we need to make more. Thanks for the question.
All right, our next question is from Vincent in St. James. Vincent, you are live with the Congressman.
Yes, good evening, Congressman. How are you?
Good evening, Vincent.
My question is, why are we unable to secure the border? I'm concerned about Long Island and the influx of illegal immigrants, coming here. I know the president is dropping them off at different places, and I heard that there's a possibility that they'll be brought out here, and how it might impact, our taxes and what have you.
All right, let me take a couple of things. Let me first start with the concern that there's going to be a significant number of these children who are coming to the border basically to seek asylum, coming to Long Island. That is not going to happen. There was a proposal to house kids at an unused or I think vacant Grumman facility, old Grumman facility in Bethpage. That idea has now been dropped. There are some kids who are being relocated in families that exist in New York State. I think approximately 3,000 kids have been relocated in all of New York State, not Long Island. 3,000 kids in all of New York State. But the vast majority of the kids who are coming to the border are going to be returned to their home country. Hopefully, they're going to be returned in an environment that is safer than the one that they've left. Some of the stories that are coming out of El Salvador and Guatemala and Honduras are just make your skin crawl. What little kids are being subjected to and what they're trying to escape. But to get to your larger point on securing the border, there's two things to know here. One is that securing the border is something that has been a priority of the Congress and a priority of the Bush administration and a priority of the Obama administration. We have double the number of border agents. I've been here since 2003. We have more than double the number of border agents along the border, patrolling the border now than we did when I started here in 2003. The budget for the Customs and Immigration Services has more than doubled since 2005. We have significantly increased our ability to surveil the border through technological means. And we have also dramatically stepped up our deportations. President Obama has, in his administration, has deported more than double the number of people that were deported in the Bush administration over 8 years. In this case, it's been over 6 years. So there's been significant effort. What's happening now with these kids, 50-some thousand kids, they're not crossing the border undetected. They are arriving at the border and being asked to be taken into custody. So they're not, in effect, circumventing the border protection that currently exists. They are, in fact, being caught or detained by the border protection that exists. But since they're kids, and since in many cases they're unaccompanied, they create a whole set of other problems that have to be dealt with. There is a real humanitarian issue involved here that really isn't an issue having to do with border protection. It's an issue having to do with absolutely horrendous conditions in the countries that they're escaping. And by the way, this humanitarian crisis is also happening in other Central American countries, and it's happening in Mexico because these kids and their parents are desperate to get them out of horrible situations. So let me summarize. One, we have a real humanitarian crisis at the border, which the administration, I will say candidly, was slow to deal with. They are now attempting to deal with it. There are two different proposals going through the Congress to try to provide the funding that's necessary to allow us to deal with this in both a humane way, but in a way that respects our laws and respects our borders. But big picture, our borders are significantly more secure than they were when I came to the Congress 10 years ago, 12 years ago. I hope, Vincent, that answers your question.
Okay, our next call is going to be from Judith from Amagansett. And before we go on, I would just like to remind everyone, if you have a question, please press *3 to go into the queue. Judith, you are live with the Congressman.
Thank you. Congressman Bishop, I just wondered if there has been any progress regarding the Voter Rights Act and restoration of some of the rights that are being taken away by some of the states for voters who might be suspected of voting Democratic.
There's a couple of issues going on here. The Supreme Court invalidated a section of the Voting Rights Act in a ruling that they issued earlier this year. And there is legislation that has been developed that would try to restore some of those rights. I support that legislation. It has not yet passed into law, but there is a bipartisan effort to restore those rights, and I'm very hopeful that it will pass into law. The other issue that's going on is really something, and that has to do with the enforcement and interpretation of the Voting Rights Act of 1964. There are other, I will call them voter suppression efforts going on in a great many states. Thankfully, New York is not one of them. But there are many states that have, under the guise of preventing voter fraud, they are putting in place really onerous restrictions that are difficult for seniors and people of limited means to comply with. For example, they need a government-issued picture ID. But if they don't have a driver's license, and many seniors do not have licenses, many people of limited means do not have licenses, this is a particular problem for them. But if they don't have a government-issued ID, a picture ID, they're not going to be able to be allowed to vote. And I think these are efforts, as I say, that are misguided because there is virtually no evidence of voter fraud in any of the states that have put in place these requirements. So it is a state-by-state issue that the federal government has no jurisdiction over. Each state establishes the requirements that they deem fit to put into place. I will say this. I think what we can do in New York, and this is irrespective of what's one's political orientation or political philosophy, we should see to it that we don't suppress the vote ourselves. In a normal election, 40 to 50% of the population eligible to vote votes. And so that's voter suppression that people are imposing on themselves. And this is a right that a lot of people fought very hard for in this country, and some people died for in this country. And I think we have a civic obligation to exercise that right. So in New York, we control whether we go to vote or not. In states that are putting in place these onerous restrictions, I very much hope that the people of the states will recognize how mean-spirited and short-sighted these issues are, or these efforts are, and work to overturn them. But thank you, Judith, for the question.
Okay, our next question is going to be from Lynn. Lynn, you are on with the Congressman.
Congressman, my question is about the new utility company, PSEG,
Yes.
which has come to town, and really I believe, total disregard to our scenic areas, our historic areas, and the safety of our residents as far as where they're placing high voltage transmission lines. In addition, here in East Hampton, we have a very high hurricane risk. The east end of Long Island is surrounded by water on three sides. There's only one highway out of town, and the new redundant line that they have placed in the east end of Long Island is through residential wooded neighborhoods, where if there is a storm, it's very likely that trees and branches will fall on the transmission line that's supposedly going to provide power to our area. So I was just wondering your thoughts on this and how we can protect not just the east end of Long Island, but all of Long Island from, it seems, a very ill-advised plan that PSEG is coming to town with. We've heard also in New Jersey, where they are based, that they have run rampant in towns, and the utility lines and the poles that they have erected have totally ruined the areas, as well as put the safety of the residents at risk.
Lynn, thank you very much for the question, and it's a very important issue. And I will tell you what Fred Thiel and Assemblyman Thiel and Senator Laval and I are currently working on. And Assemblyman Thiel and I met with representatives of LIPA late last week. Here's what we're trying to do, and we're trying to deal specifically with the problem in East Hampton. And what we're trying to do is get to the point where the power line that is being installed will be placed underground, as opposed to on these, extremely large poles that are totally out of character with the residential neighborhoods that characterize eastern Long Island. And our specific approach is this. LIPA is about to get approximately $1.4 billion worth of assistance from FEMA. Roughly $700 million of that is to reimburse LIPA for expenses they incurred in dealing with Superstorm Sandy, preparing for it, cleaning up for it, and so on. So basically to reimburse them for what they've already laid out. Approximately $700 million is to be used to harden their infrastructure so that future storms will not cause as much damage. What we have gone to them with is to say, look, $700 million is an awful lot of money. We're asking you to carve out of what you had planned to do with that approximately $20 million that would allow us to underground the transmission line in East Hampton. We think it's a reasonable request. When a similar circumstance arose in Southampton a few years ago, we were able to put in place, and this is something that Fred Thiel and Senator Laval and I worked on, and particularly Fred Thiel was very effective in putting in place a plan that had LIPA pay for half the cost of undergrounding the lines, and people in the affected areas agreed to tax themselves for the other half. What we're trying to do now is get FEMA to pay for it under the direction or under the heading of hardening the infrastructure so that it will not be as susceptible to damage in future storms. And we had a very productive conversation. That doesn't mean they said yes, but we had a very productive conversation, and I am very hopeful that we can arrive at a solution here that will preserve the character of Eastern Long Island and also give us a utility infrastructure that can better withstand the kind of storms that we have to deal with on Eastern Long Island. So I'm hopeful, but I will tell you that the three of us, Senator LaValle, Assemblyman Thiel, and I, are working very hard at this, and we think we're going to be able to get somewhere. Thanks for the question, Lynn.
Okay, and I'd like to remind everyone to please press *3 if you have a question for the Congressman. And the next question is going to be from Ron in Smithtown. Ron, you are live with the Congressman.
Yes, hi, Congressman.
Hi, Ron.
Hi. First of all, before I ask my question, I hope you vote no tomorrow on the DACA proposal and the border supplement. But my question is, I'd like to ask you a question about your representation. If you positively knew that the vast majority of your constituents, let's say 80 or 90%, felt one way on a subject, but you personally felt the opposite, what would you do and why? And please don't say you would think you'll do what you think is best. Would you go against 80 or 90% of your constituents on something, let's say, like illegal immigration?
Depends on the issue, and I have to say, I mean, this is the greatest dilemma that a member of Congress has. Do you vote your conscience, or do you vote what you think is where the majority of your constituents stand? Now, if you take the position that you're going to vote where the majority of your constituents stand, then you really don't need a representative. You just need to poll every single issue, and then wherever the majority of the poll is, that's how that particular district would be represented in terms of a vote. So I believe my obligation as a member of Congress is to do the very best I can to represent the interests of the people I represent, but also to do the very best I can to inform myself about each of the issues that come before me, and then make the best judgment that I can make. I was elected to make judgments, and sometimes I make good ones, and as a human being, sometimes I make bad ones. But I don't think I have the right to completely ignore what the people of my district say, nor do I think I have the right to sign over 100% of my judgment to what the majority of the people of the district might say. It's my job to study the issues. It's my job to know how they affect the people in my district, and it is my job to make judgments, and then it's the people's job to, every 2 years to make a judgment as to whether or not I've made enough good ones or I've made too many bad ones. But that's what I try to do, and as I say, there is no rule of thumb, there is no standard practice, and this is something that every single member of Congress struggles with every single time we're asked to vote. But I will tell you what guides me. What guides me, I grew up in the district. My family's been in the district for 12 generations, and I grew up in a middle-class family where my father worked 70 or 80 hours a week, my mother worked, and so I try to look at the issues that come before me from the vantage point of the kind of middle-class family that I grew up in. And if I can come to the conclusion that voting a particular way is going to help those middle-class families that I grew up in and that I represent, then that's how I'm going to go. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, our next question is going to be from John in Hampton Bays. John, you are live with the Congressman.
Yes, Congressman.
Hi, John. How are you?
I'm John Sebald over here in Hampton Bays. The last 2 years, I've been very concerned as I walk the beaches over here, and we have an area down towards Tiana on the ocean that the dunes are completely gone from Irene mainly, and then Sandy came through with massive flooding in there. And those people living in Shinnecock Bay around it, all of our towns actually, stand a very good chance. This is over a quarter of a mile it's missing, and nobody seems to want to take the responsibility of getting at that and really taking care of it before we get hit with a major hurricane, which the Class 3, like the 38, pushed between 10 and 12 feet surge ahead of it. I believe this would be very, very damaging to our communities.
I agree with you, sir, and we are hard at work to bring beach nourishment and dune realignment projects to the entire span of the southern coast of my district. It's about 75 miles, and we're trying to hit as many spots as we can. The first spot we're hitting will start in September, and that's going to be the eastern portion of Fire Island, the portion that includes Smith Point Park, and then there will be another project later in the fall in downtown Montauk, which I would suggest from what I've seen from my own personal observation is the most imperiled part of the Atlantic coastline as you move east from the Mauritius Inlet. We did a beach nourishment project right after Sandy. I think we did the project sometime in late September or early December of 12 in the area that we call Woolsey, west of Shinnecock Inlet. So to try to protect that area, which has been the area most vulnerable to overwash, at least again as you get east of the Mauritius Inlet. The Tiana area is another area that the Corps is looking at, and I'm trying to push them to come up with a beach nourishment project there. I will say that my district has about 75 miles of Atlantic coastline, and it is simply not possible to reinforce the entire coastline. And so what the Corps has tried to do, along with the New York State and Suffolk County, is to pick those areas that are what might be referred to as erosion hotspots and deal with those. West Hampton Dunes was one, as you know, the area west of Shinnecock and in front of Oaklands and the town dock is another one, and we've dealt with that. Downtown Montauk is another one. We're dealing with that. Sacaponic is one, and Bridgehampton and the homeowners there got together and taxed themselves to do a $25 billion project there. So I'm hopeful we can do something in Tiana, and I do recognize the problem, but my job is to bring the Army Corps of Engineers to the table. I'm doing that, and now we've just got to get them to address as many of the needs as we have in our district, and hopefully, as I say, Tiana can be one of them. Thank you very much, John, for the question.
Okay, our next question is going to be from Cynthia in East Quogue, but before that, I'd like to just remind everyone to please press *3 if you have a question. Cynthia, you are live with Congressman.
Hi, Congressman.
Hi, Cynthia.
I'm calling regarding the Race to the Top agenda that I know you pushed for. My question really is this. I'm in East Quogue. We had, with the tax cap implementation, things are tight to begin with, and then Race to the Top came through. East Quogue got $0 in Race to the Top funds. Yet we still have to come up with a new APR plan, curriculum, testing, professional development. To do all that, we've basically cut our librarian. We have no foreign language. We've cut staffing. We're now in moderate fiscal stress. This basically, Race to the Top became the mother of all unfunded mandates for our district. And I'm just asking if there's any relief in sight.
Okay. First off, you've asked a very, very important question. And first off, let me try to set the record straight. I did not push for Race to the Top. And in fact, Race to the Top has never come before the Congress for approval. The genesis of Race to the Top was what we call the stimulus bill, the Recovery Act of 2009. The administration asked for $3.4 billion to encourage states to put in place standards for graduation that would result in students graduating as either college or career ready. There was at the time, no proposal for Race to the Top at all. Then the Department of Education put together this Race to the Top proposal and put it out to the states. The states were able to make their own decisions as to whether or not they wanted to apply for Race to the Top funding. New York State made the decision to apply. They submitted an application and it failed. They then made the decision to revise their application and submit a new application which succeeded. And the federal government provided the state with approximately $770 or $750 million. The state then decided how they were going to divide that funding. And I don't have it in front of me, I'm doing this from memory, but approximately half of the funding stayed in Albany to establish data systems and assessment systems. A significant portion of the remaining half went to New York City schools, and the rest of the schools in New York State basically got table scraps. This was not a federal decision. This was a state decision, as was a PPR. That is a state decision, not a federal decision. And Common Core is a state decision, not a federal decision. These are all very, very important issues, and the burden that Race to the Top has put on local districts in some cases is simply unjustified by the benefit. There are some districts that have benefited, but more and more districts have actually suffered as a result of Race to the Top in terms of allocation of resources, and I think that's wrong. But I will say again, how those resources were allocated was a New York State decision, not a federal decision, and it was a New York State decision to seek receipt of those funds. I think where we are right now with Common Core, which is related to Race to the Top, although they are two distinct issues, we're in the right place, which is basically a 2-year timeout. And I think that the implementation of Common Core was handled in a terribly substandard fashion, and I think this 2-year pause will allow school districts, teachers, parents, and the state to put in place something in a much more professional and supportive fashion than opposed to the sort of rush job that we've had thus far. I hope, Cynthia, that answers your question. I know I went a little far afield other than Race to the Top, but I hope that answers your question.
Okay, I'd like to remind everyone to please press *3 if you have a question for the Congressman. Our next question is from Linda in St. James. Linda, you are live with the Congressman.
Hello, Congressman.
Hi,
My
Linda.
question is about groundwater pollution. I know back in 1978 when I first became aware that there are a lot of chemicals in the groundwater, and we don't really know all of them or what happens when they combine with each other. And I'd like to know, what do you think is the best way to continue to protect our groundwater and to make sure the water that we are drinking remains pure?
It's a very important question, and it's an issue that I think deserves the attention of every level of government, and I'm very pleased to see that Steve Bellone, our county executive, is making water quality, both our surface waters and our groundwater, one of the signature issues of his administration. It's very important to do. I am the senior Democrat on a subcommittee of the Transportation Committee called the Water Resources and Environment Subcommittee. And one of our responsibilities is jurisdiction over the Environmental Protection Agency as it relates to their responsibilities under the Clean Water Act. And I will tell you that I am in an almost daily fight to protect the ability of the EPA to enforce the Clean Water Act. There is a concerted effort to undercut the Clean Water Act or to handicap or handcuff the EPA in their ability to enforce the act. And there are proposals, there's legislation that's passed the House that has not yet taken on the force of law. There are all kinds of efforts to defund or underfund the EPA so that they can't do their job. And I think that all of those efforts are terribly misguided. And as I say, I am one of the members of Congress that are leading the fight to protect the Clean Water Act and protect the EPA's ability to enforce it, and in New York State, the DEC's ability to enforce it. We have one of the problems that we have with water quality, both surface water and groundwater, is nutrient pollution, primarily nitrogen, and the great source of that is the sewage systems or the septic systems that pretty much characterize Long Island. And one of the things that I've been very heavily engaged in is expanding the ability of the federal government to support local communities in their efforts to bring in place sewage treatment systems. Our wastewater infrastructure needs on Long Island are enormous. There has been a limited ability or a limited willingness of the federal government lately to support local communities in trying to put in place wastewater infrastructure. So I was one of 4 people that just wrote a bill called the Water Resources Development Act. It is now signed into law that creates a new financing mechanism for how we can help local communities improve their wastewater infrastructure, and in the process of doing so, they will improve water quality, both of surface waters and groundwater. And that just signed into law maybe a month ago, and so I think that holds great promise for communities on Long Island, for example, to be able to do things that right now simply are not affordable, but are necessary given how important water quality is to our quality of life. I hope, Linda, that answers your question.
Okay, our next question is going to be from Selena in Lake Ronkonkoma. Selena, you are live.
Hello, Congressman.
Hello, Selena.
How are you tonight?
Good, how are you?
Thank you for doing this, first of all.
Thank you.
I believe it's very helpful. I'm living right now with my mother. My dad and my mom were both very involved with you. You've helped my parents in the past. So first and foremost, I want to say thank you for that.
You're very kind. Thank you.
I have a question with regards to any updates you may have on the extension of unemployment benefits. Do you have any comment on that at all?
I wish I had good news for you, but I don't. The Senate passed a 3-month extension of unemployment for those who are in long-term unemployment status. The House of Representatives has refused to bring it up. They have simply refused to consider it. There is a mechanism in the House that is called a discharge petition, which means that if 218 members of the House, that's 50% plus 1, sign this petition, the leadership of the House must immediately bring whatever measure is in question up for a vote. We have started a discharge petition on the unemployment insurance extension. It has, I think, 197 signatures on it. I'm sad to say all Democrats, not a single Republican, has signed it. And there is no willingness on the part of the Republican leadership of the House to engage on this issue. But in the meantime, we now have 3.5 million Americans who have no longer have eligibility for unemployment insurance because we've refused to extend it. I think my own view is that this is, to say it's deeply unfortunate is an understatement. I think this borders on the obscene that we have 3.5 million of our fellow citizens who are out of work through no fault of their own, and our response is to say, good luck, I hope this works out for you. I think that that's outrageous, and I wish that my colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle would be willing to at least consider it. I mean, bring it up for a vote. If it fails, it fails, but they won't even allow it to come up for a vote, and I think that's simply wrong. Hope that answers your question.
Okay, our next question is going to be from Thomas in Southampton, but before that, I'd like to put another reminder to please press *3 if you have a question. Thomas, you're live.
Oh, hello, Congressman. Thank you for doing
Thomas.
this.
How are you?
Good. I was, George Washington in his farewell address warned about partisan politics, and it seems like we're in another point in our history where his warning has got great import. Are there any signs that men of goodwill reasoning together might again start to happen in Congress? And how can a voter like me be a voice for civility and legislative leadership besides voting for you again?
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate that. I think there are some very modest signs that I hope take hold. A few minutes ago on this call, I talked about the Water Resources Development Act. It was developed in a bipartisan way. As I said, I was one of 4 people who wrote it, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans. And we wrote a bill that got 417 votes in the House. Now, that's almost unheard of to get 417 votes for anything out of 435. And I'm very proud of that. And the reason we were able to do it is the 4 of us, the 2 Dems and the 2 Rs, sat in a room for hours, and we actually legislated. We went back and forth. We traded ideas. We compromised. We gave a little. We got a little. And we recognized each of us recognized what the other's limitations were, and we trusted one another, and we got it done. And I would say that unfortunately, the process that we followed is the exception rather than the rule in this Congress. But I will also say that at the top of this call, I talked about the Veterans Affairs bill that we passed. That is another bill where there was bipartisan cooperation, bipartisan compromise, and that bipartisanship extended not just in the House but also in the Senate. So we were able to set aside the differences that sort of paralyze us from time to time to do something that was right for an extremely important group of people in this country, that is to say our veterans that deserve every possible consideration that we can provide. Let me say this. You talked about civility, you talked about goodwill. I think that at the root of the paralysis that grips this Congress is the absence of civility and the absence of goodwill and the presence of anger. And for me, the turning point or the tipping point was the election of 2010 when we elected a significant number of Tea Party aligned people to the House of Representatives, and they brought with them not just a passion, which is good, not just a conviction about what's right, which is good, but they brought with them an anger and a disdain for those who thought differently or think differently than they do. And I think that's what we need to work through. We need to be willing to do what we did in the Word Bill, which is trust one another. And we need to be willing to recognize that we come at issues from different places with different experiences and we represent different kinds of people, but that if this country's going to work, we have to find a way to knit that all together. So I know I'm willing to do it. I've proven that I'm willing to do it. And I just wish more and more of my colleagues were willing to do so. There are a lot of us on both sides of the aisle that are willing to do that. We just need more. But I thank you for the question.
Okay, I'd like to remind everyone to please press *3 and also let you know that we have under 10 minutes left in the call. Our next question is going to be from Emily in Riverhead. Emily, you are live with the Congressman.
Yes, good evening. Hello?
Good evening, Emily.
Yes, good evening, Congressman. I am on getting Section 8, something that I was horrified that I had to do years ago. But when the sequester was put in place, I believe last year, I renewed my lease in May, and my Section 8 was reduced by $128 a month, which I get $1,200, and after I pay my bills, I end up with $300 to live on for the month. I checked my bank account on Monday, my balance, and I had $1 in the bank.
Oh, boy.
Fortunately, I do have enough food to get me through till Friday when my check will be hit the bank. Fortunately, because the 3rd comes on a Sunday, the check comes early. Is there anything being done about that sequester? It's still in place? Because if my rent goes up next year, I'm up the creek without a paddle.
You're so right. I have some confidence. I won't say 100% confidence, but I have some confidence that we are going to fix the sequester. I think everyone agrees that it was bad public policy, and I think everyone agrees that it inflicted some real pain on people who are least able to accommodate the pain. And Emily, I would say that you are the kind of person I'm talking about where we inflicted some real pain on you, and you're in no position to be able to deal with it or to have to deal with it. So I think we're going to fix it. And as I say, the Republicans don't like it, Democrats don't like it, and But one of the things that is really challenging for me in this Congress, and it goes back to the question that Thomas asked a few minutes ago, there is at times a refusal on the part of some of my colleagues to look at the real life consequences of the policy decisions that they make. And one of the things we need to recognize is that when we cut spending, it's not just an abstract. When we cut spending, real people get hurt in very real ways. And that's part of what happened with the sequester. It's part of what will happen if we ever were to put in place the kinds of really draconian cuts to our budget that have passed the House of Representatives in the Republican budget resolution. Now, as I said earlier in the call, that has not taken on the force of law. I doubt it ever will. At least I hope it never does, because those kinds of cuts that we're talking about would inflict real pain. So let me say two things to sum it up. One, I believe we're going to fix the sequester. That's one. Two, Emily, I would encourage you to be in touch with our office so that we can see if there are any ways that we can help you. And again, I referenced this young man at the earlier in the call. His name is Bilal. He's an outstanding young man who helps people with issues having to do with housing and other social safety net programs. So please give him a call, area code 631-289-6500. And Emily, thank you and good luck. All right.
Okay,
Ned?
our next call is going to be from John Sacker. John, you are live with the Congressman.
Good evening, Congressman.
Good evening, John.
I'd like to get your view as to what you think Plum Island should look like. It's sort of a personal view of the future, and where does it stand with the sale of that property? The federal government has it now, and what is the disposition, and what's going to be happening?
Okay, let me give you what is existing law, and then let me give you what it is we're trying to get done. Under existing law, the General Services Administration has been charged with the responsibility of preparing Plum Island for sale to the highest bidder. And this follows a decision by the Congress to construct something called the National Bio and Agro-Terrorism Facility, and the site for that facility that's been selected is in Manhattan, Kansas. And the way this idea was pitched to the Congress back in the Bush administration was that we could build this facility and it would be cost-free to the government because we could build it and pay for it entirely with the proceeds of the sale of Plum Island. That was an idea that was never possible because the original price of NBAF was $400 million. No way were we going to be able to get $400 million for the sale of Plum Island, but now NBAF has a price tag of up to $1.2 billion. So what I've been working on are two things. One, I've been trying to block the construction of NBAF and block the appropriation of funds to allow that construction to go forward. Thus far, I have been outvoted on that. I have offered amendments to various appropriations bills that would strip funding for NBAF out of those bills. Those amendments have been defeated. What I then started to try, and are now trying, is an effort to decouple the future of Plum Island from NBAF, and that is to say, to separate the decision about what to do with Plum Island from the decision about building NBAF. So I have legislation which has bipartisan support that would allow the General Services Administration to back away from selling Plum Island and would have Plum Island subject to the way the federal government normally disposes of what they consider to be surplus property, which is to first offer it to other federal agencies like the National Park Service or the Fish and Wildlife Service or something like that. So here you asked me what I would do. Ideally, and the town of Southold, by the way, has been fabulous in this, but ideally I would like to see the research facility that currently exists at Plum Island either remain a research facility or be modified in some way to become a different kind of research facility, whether it's, energy or, renewable energy or whatever. I don't know, but I'd like to see that facility continue to employ people and do work that's important to do for the country, and I would like to see the rest of the island remain in its pristine condition. And the town of Southold, as I said, has been fabulous in this. They have passed a zoning law that would require that the portion of the island that has not been developed for academic use or laboratory use remain in its current condition and would not be available for building. That dramatically drives down the value of Plum Island, which I think is a good thing. and I think it makes it easier for us to make the argument that a federal entity such as the National Park Service should take it over. So that's where I'm headed, and I'm hopeful that we'll be successful. And as I say, I've got bipartisan support on this, and there's support across the Sound. The Connecticut the Connecticut delegation supports what I'm trying to get done, and they've been very helpful. So I think that wraps up all the questions we have time for. I thank you all for joining us tonight. If I can be of any assistance to any of you going forward, please call my office in Patchogue, 631-289-6500. And again, I will say, if you had a question you didn't get a chance to ask, give that number a call, and we'll get an answer to you as quickly as we can. Thank you again for all joining the call, and enjoy the rest of the summer. Thank you.